Welcome to Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game. Hi everyone, I'm your host, Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and money gamer extraordinaire. Today we're talking about the 5 consumer retirement fears with nationally recognized retirement expert, Curtis Cloke. Welcome to the show, Curtis.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here.
Well, Curtis, I know a lot of people have a lot of fears about retirement and a lot of misconceptions about it. But before we get there, I want you to kind of walk me through this basic idea, because we're always looking for ways to explain to our clients what's going on. I love your allegory here of mountain climbing. Talk about it.
Well, you know, during our working years, we're basically accumulating money. You know, we've got a lot of years in which to do that. And so metaphorically, it's kind of like climbing a mountain. And when you think about climbing a mountain, you know, what's the purpose of climbing a mountain? We normally think is to reach the summit. However, when we finally do reach the summit and we've got our bag packed as we get up there, remember, we don't just pack that bag in order to get to the summit. When we're preparing for this trip, we prepare as much for the descent back to camp as we do to get to the summit. And when packing that bag, we must be very careful that we're positioned to get safely back down the mountain to camp. Why? Because 2/3 of the mountain deaths that occur in a mountain climb are in the descent back to camp. And once we get to camp, because it's normally about halfway down the mountain, we're usually in the safe zone. Well, metaphorically, we're accumulating money, and what we do in distribution is completely different than the way we managed our money during the climb to the top. And so having the right combination of retirement income tools for both the climb and the descent is really important. And what we did in accumulation won't work in distribution.
Well, yeah, it seems like we have a pretty good understanding of how things accumulate. But when do I take things out? When do I distribute it? Should I take my Social Security? Should I take my qualified plan? There's a lot of questions on that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, let's talk about the fears. You know, we're talking about these fears, and you have found out, you've been in practice for a long time, Curtis. You're a national speaker, you're an author, you even do your own software to calculate all this. These are the 5, there's many fears, but these seem to be the top 5. Walk us through these fears.
All right. There are a lot of different fears that we're not going to talk about today that should be considered and focused on. However, I will tell you that when I look and compile a list of the top 5, these happen to be the top 5 that I tend to get from my own clients. The people that cross the threshold of my office for the first time. First one is, do I have enough, Kurt? You know, it really doesn't matter how many zeros behind it, whether I'm talking to a client with $500,000 or I'm talking to a client with $35 million. It really doesn't matter. They seem to all have a similar question mark because of that. It's all relative to the standard of lifestyle and the assets for which they've been able to afford themselves. They're worried, do I have enough? And can I position this to backtest against those black swan events like 2008?
Well, I heard you speak before, and you said that the number 1 risk to retirement is living too long. It's human longevity. Outliving your money now, this kind of compounds it if we're going to be living longer.
See, if I live to 70, 75 mathematically, and we've backtested this a number of ways, if you live to 70, 75, retire at 60, 65, it probably doesn't matter what your rate of return, what inflation did, whether you got sick just 2-3 years before you retired or passed away. The reality is, if you die a short period of time after you retire, it really doesn't matter. These risks aren't a big deal to you. But because people are living longer and longer and longer in retirement, it multiplies every one of those risks. And people don't perceive the real length of time for which they're going to live. They think of average life expectancy of the U.S. American, 78 for a male, 82 for a female. But what they fail to understand is that when you're looking at that calculation actuarially, from those that survive to 65, suddenly the male jumps to about 82 and the female jumps to about 88. Oh, and just as soon as they get to those numbers, here's what they don't understand. 50% of the people die before they get there, and guess what? 50% of the people live longer. And with medical technology and the expansion of what we know in the world today, people are going to live longer and longer. So outliving the money is a big deal. And targeting and believing how long you might live as the oldest surviving spouse, that's a tough one. Next one's control the money. Oftentimes they don't understand the cost of control of their money. Third one is the rising inflation. I don't have to convince people about this anymore. People kind of get it. Now, next one, leaving legacy is not important to everybody. About half the time, it seems to be important to most.
Now, when you say legacy, you're talking about children, maybe grandchildren, maybe a charity of your choice.
Yes, and not everybody cares, but it still makes the top 5 list, which is what we're going to talk about. And then lastly, investment mistake. And it's two-pronged. People, because of Madoffs of the world and all the stories we hear about people, the advisors not doing the right thing, people just don't know who to trust.
Senior fraud is huge out there right now.
Big deal. And so that's one component of this investment mistake. And so when people don't know what to do, they stick their head in the sand or they procrastinate their decisions. And guess who makes the mistake now? Well, of course they do. And so our goal is to structure a plan that will help our clients alleviate these fears to not just retire, but retire with confidence.
Now, when we're talking about the 5 fears, and when we come back in the second segment, we're going to walk through them now and say, here's how you can solve this, and short endurance. But these are kind of integrated. There's not just one fear, that's mine and I'm taking it. These have all correlation to each other. And that's the thing that I found remarkable about how consumers look at retirement and the 5 fears that they bring up when they're walking through your retail door as an advisor.
It's really important that they be able to say this. It's really important for me as an advisor to understand them and make sure that they feel heard.
When we come back from the break, we're going to bust these out and we're going to walk through them and we're going to talk the solution for each one of them. Right.
Take a close look at your hard-earned dollar. How do you think your money's doing? Are you keeping an eye on it? Is it protected from taxes, inflation, and market risk? Over time, those Washingtons could become Franklins. With tax-advantaged indexed universal life, from one of the largest distributors of indexed universal life, Ash Brokerage.
Well, welcome back to our second segment. We're with Curtis Cloke, an expert in retirement income. And I want to talk about these 5. We've laid them out. Outliving your money. Okay, that's my fear. Now, how can I alleviate that fear as an advisor?
Well, understand that sticking your head in the sand or not asking the question isn't an alternative. And so many want to come, 1 month ahead of time, 2 weeks ahead of time, maybe a week after they actually chose to retire for one reason or another. And then they want to back test the numbers and say, okay, now tell me it's okay. And the reality is, I have to tell you that the earlier, as soon as the very minute you start thinking about where retirement might play for you, we're recommending clients do this as early as possible. In fact, in our practice, we recommend people even 10 years, even 15 years out, actually start forecasting this as they move forward to see if there's a minor vector change that they can do to get on track. And so outliving their money is a question that has to be mathematically vetted. And you don't know until you test it as to whether or not you do or do not have enough money.
Now, once you test that, you have abilities to make sure that there's part of their retirement could be forever, so that they don't worry about outliving their money.
Yeah, one of the biggest risks that we try to take off the table right off the bat, especially if I've got just one spouse that has longevity in their family history, given today's longevity in play, is making sure that I have income they can't destroy from assets that they can't outrun. They can't outlive it and they can't destroy it. It's kind of like their Social Security and their pension if you think about it.
Now, when you do this, you're actually quarantining or walling off this kind of block of money. But don't I lose control of my money if I do something like that?
No, actually, you'll be interested to know that if I do this properly, and though I don't want to get into the minutia of any product here, most advisors or most clients don't understand this issue of control of money, because really what has to happen when I have an income gap, I need so much income, there's so much inflation I can project, there's a certain period of time for which I perceive that me and my spouse may live given our current health and family history. And when I do all that math and science and I do that testing, the reality is I have to finance the gap. I have to hold enough money hostage if I'm using a traditional, what I call systematic withdrawal plan strategy, and just pull in withdrawals to cover what my gap is while trying to preserve and hold my assets. The reality is that I'm stuck living on yields and interest. And when I'm only getting a 3% interest rate or a 2% interest rate or whatever the interest rate is at the time, that means that for every $1 million I have at 3%, I'm only going to get $30,000 of income gap money out of that. So when you think about it in today's terms, where I'm trying to preserve the asset and still generate income, although I do have control, I really don't if I have to hold it hostage at the current yield level to buy income in order to last a lifetime and preserve those assets.
So there's a way to really make sure you don't outlive your money and you still have control of some of your excess or discretionary funds.
Yeah, the question is, can I position it in a way that I don't need to hold as much hostage and I get back control? That's the question.
Rising inflation. Well, we've been dancing around this. I mean, there was talk that we were going to be in deflation, but I think those days are over. When we're looking at rising inflation, how can I take an asset and say, I don't want to depend on the market to make that happen? Is there another way to play on that?
Yeah, so bottom line is you can buy income streams out there. So again, I don't want to get into the minutia product on this show. Rising, I can buy inflation built in. I can buy inflation guaranteed from 1/10 of a point to 6.5%. And I can ladder those income streams to customize a particular
So I actually plug in a inflation number, which might be 2%, 3%, and I'll know every year it's going to bump it whether the inflation or the government changes.
Correct.
It's always going to make that increase.
That's correct. And with inflation, understand it, 3% every 24 years under the law of 72. Every 24 years, if I started out needing $50,000 a year or $100,000 a year, just double it every 24 years and pro-rationally as I approach the 24th year.
So if you're doing retirement, by the time you're sitting around mortality, that thing has doubled already on your income. Talk about leaving a legacy. Some people want to do it, some people don't. But for the people who want to do it, they fear that they're going to have to take care of this and can't really address things like children, grandchildren, and charities of choice.
You know, people want to leave their mark in this world. Many of them do, not everybody. And some, you know, were never married, don't have children, and God bless them. That's certainly fine. They may have charitable intent. They may have another legacy. But by and large, the majority of the population out there will tell you, even though they want to take care of themselves and their spouses first, if they're laying on their deathbed, I have to tell you, even when they retired and they said that wasn't a big deal, virtually everybody on their deathbed wants to believe that they're leaving something behind. They want to believe that there's something that they'll be remembered by, or something that that they can leave that mark on.
And that's possible. I can still not have any of these fears and still do something for children, grandchildren, or charity.
It now requires even more math and science to make sure that we're kind of engineering that so that we know, not think or not believe or hope, cross our fingers and cross our toes, but actually engineer that to happen. It can be done.
Now, in the first segment, you said a lot of people make investment mistakes because they heard about the Bernie Madoffs of the year, the senior fraud that's out there. They're afraid to talk to an advisor. But when it really comes down to it, when they do it, it seems like the consumer usually have a harder time and really makes big mistakes. How can I vet an advisor?
Well, certainly the way I'd vet an advisor is I'd go to brokercheck.com. I'd check with the insurance department of your state commissioner's office. And I know, Steve, you had some people on your show where there were some other ideas that you had, but know your advisor. Google their name. Find out what you find out about this advisor. Don't be afraid to just go out to Google and see what comes up. Make sure you're looking at the right guy if there's, a common name out there. But there are a number of ways you can protect yourself. And by the way, most of my senior clients, crazy as it sounds, do that today.
Wow. Well, that's our show for today. I want to thank Curtis for being my special guest and today's money mentor. And before moving forward with any ideas on the show, always consult your tax advisor or legal counsel. And as the good Reverend John Wesley once said, make all you can, save all you can, give all you can. I'm Steve Savant. We'll see you next week.